Han tabte vedmål her i går, så han er blevet klippet. Men det er ham. Altså, det er nok. Det er CG, der kommer på scenen her. Og giv ham en stor hånd. Og bagefter er der mulighed for lige at stille spørgsmål. Han fyrer cirka en god time af for fulde gardinen der. Vi vil også godt lige præsentere Pierre, som lige vil sige et par ord. Tak fordi I kom.
Jamen, god aften og velkommen. Der er sådan set ikke så meget mere at sige, hvad Henrik har sagt, andet selvfølgelig på Eskildsen Musik vegne og på Marshalls vegne er glad for at kunne byde velkommen til det her arrangement. Udover Chris George, som vil spille lidt for jer i aften, så har vi også Steve Yelding med. Steve har været hos Marshall i over 20 år og ved stort set alt, hvad der har rørt sig inden for den her lille fabrik. Vil fortælle lidt om historien og hvad der har gjort Marshall til, hvad Marshall er i dag. Så sådan noget nice. Som sagt, hvis der er nogen af jer, der har lyst til at stille spørgsmål, så skal I være hjertelig velkommen, men hvis I være så venlige og så gemme dem tilbage efter, så kan I spørge alt, hvad I har lyst til, og I kan selvfølgelig også selv komme op og prøve produkterne bagefter, hvis I også kan tage ud med nogle af drengene her fra butikken. Så vil jeg give ordet til Pierre Ulrichsen fra Musik.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to speak to you in English because your English is much better than my Danish. So I'll speak slowly and it's not too technical, but the main point of tonight is to let you hear Marshall amps as they sound. All these amps are standard, they're not modified in any way, and the guitar is going straight into the front of every amp. The only external effect that Chris uses is a standard crybaby wah-wah, and there's a Boss chromatic tuner in line as well. So all the distortion, all the reverb, all the delays are built into the various models that we're going to hear. We're really going to take you on a musical journey through the Marshall range. It's a fairly short journey because we haven't got a massive amount of time, but before we do that I should tell you a little bit about Chris. Chris won the Young Guitarist of the Year competition about 6 years ago, and very quickly after that began demonstrating for Marshall. And we've used him ever since. And since he's been with us, he's worked with people from Iron Maiden, he's worked with people from Bad Company, plus a lot of other smaller bands that most of you wouldn't have heard of. Marshall himself was actually a drummer. And through the 50s he had his own band, plus he was teaching some of the top drummers, one of them in particular being a guy called Mitch Mitchell, who later became famous with Jimi Hendrix's band. And Jim Marshall actually taught him to play drums. Well, Jim made so much money in the 50s that he had to invest it somewhere, so he invested it in a music shop, initially just selling drums, but then selling guitars. And the guitarists that were coming into the shop at that time were people like Ritchie Blackmore, Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton, just as youngsters. And they were very influential in creating the sound of that first Marshall. One guy in particular, a gentleman called Pete Townsend of The Who, was very brash, a very loud young man, and wanted this particular sound. So in September 1962, the first Marshall amp was made. They sold 25 on the first Saturday, but they could only make 2 a week. So it took some time for them to catch up with the orders that were made. Another interesting story is the angle on the cabinet. It's nothing to do with the sonic performance or performance of the cabinet. It was purely that in Jim's eyes, he felt that the amp on the straight cabinet didn't look as nice as on the angled cabinet. So it was purely a visual thing. But he was asked in an interview once about why he did it, and Jim has quite a dry sense of humour. And he said, oh, it's because it points the speakers up and you can hear them better. That's bullshit. So, by the end of the 60s, things had changed again, and bands like Eric Clapton with Cream, Paul Kossoff with Free, and of course Jimi Hendrix were using those original Super Lead 100 watts. A lot of players still use them today. Angus Young uses them, Eddie Van Halen uses them, even though he endorses PV5150s. His basic sound is still a Marshall 100 watt Super Lead. And the reason they chose those amps was because of the character of the power stage. A 100 watt valve power amp driving hard is very pure and full of character. And if you're a crack player, it won't make you sound any better, but you'll be crap really, really loud. However, things moved on again, and by the mid-70s we had to introduce a master volume, which was just a simple preamp to cascade the preamp valves into the power amp valves. It allowed distortion at lower volume. because by then PAs were beginning to get bigger and there wasn't that need for the massive sound from the stage. So the 203 was born in 1975. It became
So that was the 2203, and that's a good sound to keep in your mind. What can you do this? Because during the 80s and the 90s, the obsession with gain took over. And everybody was playing with masses of front-end gain. And basically, that's fine, but if the back end of the power amp isn't doing what it's supposed to do, something gets lost somewhere. And that's what happened in the 90s. So when we designed a JCM 2000, we wanted to bring back all that openness and the big sound of the valve power stage. But we had to add extra things at the front. So for example, on the DSL, which is the dual super lead, we've got 2 separate channels, but with 2 modes on each channel. On the TSL, we've got 3 completely separate channels, and they're very comprehensively featured. Now, obviously, when we make an amp like this, the first thing we do is let serious top professionals play them. And as soon as Jeff Beck heard the 50-watt version, he took it on tour with him, and he's still using it today.
two sounds. If you switch to the second channel, again you've got two selections, overdrive 1 and overdrive 2. Overdrive 1 sounds like this. If we boost it to overdrive 2, it sounds like this. Power stage is all solid state, unlike the amp that we just heard. There are preamp valves in there which give a little bit of extra bite at the front end, and you've got 3 completely separate channels plus the acoustic simulator. But we'll let Chris play a track and then we'll talk a bit more about it. So this is the AVT 275. clean sound in that one. And that's a good place to start. Although there's quite a lot on the front panel, it's very logical. It's just like having 4 separate amps in one case with a couple of bits of shared EQ. You've also got separate effects for the clean channels and the overdrive channels. So Chris was using like a chorus on the clean sounds, but delay on the overdrive sounds. So that's quite a useful feature. And you can switch it on and off with the foot control as well. So this and then if you bring the digital effects in on that, which in this case is a bit of chorus, it changes it to this. Then if you switch to the overdrive channels, you've got overdrive 1 and overdrive 2. As the name suggests, overdrive 1 is slightly lower gain, more traditional vintage style Marshall, and overdrive 2 is much more extreme. So overdrive 1, this is with the gain on about a third, so it's keeping it very vintage sounding like this. Solos up and a bit more gain, so it sounds like this. Now we were also aware of the changing trends in music that a lot of people like to scoop the sound, so there's a scoop button on there which would change the sound you've just heard to this. Because it's digital, it's very high quality. It was actually a chip designed for use with guitar, so you don't get any of the grainy sort of noise that you can get sometimes using external processors, even high quality ones. So that was a custom designed chip for Marshall, put into all the AVTs, like the 100, the 150 and the 275, which is called mode 4. It's quite simply because it's got 4 modes. But it's actually split into 2 amps. And again, it's all solid state. Although it looks like a more traditional amp, it is a solid state power stage. There's preamp powers in the front end again to help with the drive from the front end. But it uses a lot of the technology that we learned in advanced offset technology, but it's made it even more extreme. What we've also done now is we've built 2 separate power stages into the amp. So you've got amp 1 with a clean and crunch sound, and amp 2 with overdrive 1 and overdrive 2. Now amp 1 is voiced in the same way as those vintage Marshalls that I mentioned earlier, and it's tight damped, so it holds the speakers quite tightly, it doesn't let them move too much. Whereas amp 2 is really loosely damped, and it has all that really heavy loose bottom end for basically new metal and much more contemporary stuff. But there's a lot of other things on this that we'll talk about in a minute. But for the first track that you're going to hear, the guitar is detuned to a C tuning, so it's quite a lot lower than the standard tuning. And we're only going through the bottom cabinet. Each one of these cabinets handles 400 watts, and the amp is capable of 350 watts. So I think we've got enough power with 1 cabinet, thank you very much. And Chris is going to be using a mixture of amp 2 and amp 1. Amp 1 for the clean sounds and amp 2 for the overdrive sounds. So this is the mode 4. to a standard Marshall cab. They're actually 4 inches taller, so they've got a lot more actual volume of cabinet. And the speakers have been specially designed. So all that gain and power that's being driven from the amp is handled perfectly by the speaker. It's being delivered in full force going forwards. But it doesn't lose quality. Often again, as I mentioned earlier, if you take the gain too far, everything goes muddy and messy. And on stage, that's useless. You just get lost in the mix with everything else. But this has got enough definition, because of the power of the power stage, to drive it through. So if we go, we'll stay with amp 2, and we'll just let you hear overdrive 1 on its own first of all. If we switch to overdrive 2, you'll immediately hear there's a lift and a lot more gain. There's also a scoop on here which scoops out the mid even more, and that's in addition to the tone matrix, which actually gives you 3 different selections of mid. So you can select where the mid band comes in, and you can scoop it as well. So there's a tremendous amount of mirror control. So we'll add the scoop to that now. There is also another very, very useful feature. In the master section here, you've got a resonance control, which is not unlike the deep switch on the DSL. You turn it to maximum, you've got even more bottom end. And that really would loosen your barrel. You've got a presence control, which is fairly standard on a Marshall amp. Then you've got this wonderful thing called solo boost. And that's for those special occasions when you set up the amp at the beginning of the night, you've done your sound check, and everything's fine for the first half. And you all go off at the interval, and the drummer has a few, and comes back and plays twice as loud. Sound familiar? Right. Well, if you've got nowhere else to go, if your amp's already where it needs to be set, you've now got a solo boost which gives you 6 dB boost on any of those sounds, just at the click of the switch. It's up to 6 dB controllable from the front panel, so if you just want a little bit of boost, you don't have it on the maximum. But for tonight, we've got it on maximum. So you get the full 6 dB boost. We'll perhaps do it with overdrive 1, alright?
No, let's do it for overdrive.
Okay. So we're trying to think all the time of slight innovations to make a guitarist's life easier, and that's because all the designers at Marshall are guitar players. In fact, they're guitar players more than they are designers. That's why they come in late every time. Now we haven't touched on amp 1 yet. We'll come to that in a second. But because of the looseness of the damping, you can hear how that whole bottom end thing is happening in there. And it's ideal for very contemporary style playing. But this amp isn't just capable of that. There is a very nice clean sound, and there is a good crunch sound as well. We'll just let Chris play a track with standard tuning now, using amp 1.
So that's just the clean sound about one that we heard there. So if we just go back to the clean sound, if you don't mind, Chris.
No, that's all right.
Digital reverb that's built into this, I think it's very nice. You don't get some of the clanks that you get with more mechanical reverbs. It's a very pure reverb. I'll just take it up a little bit more for you. Then if we switch to the crunch sound, it's like this. The more tighter damping of that sound compared to the overdrive 2. You can actually feel it, especially when you're close to the speakers, you feel that they're moving a lot less, but every bit is distorted, but it's a completely different character. There is a scoop button on there as well, and it works in a slightly different place, so it will turn the sound you just heard to this. So with the Mode 4, you've got the 4 different actual modes, you've got scoop buttons on each channel, you've got the solo boost available on each channel, but all you need is the 6-way foot control which comes with it to bring all those things into play. So this is really the state of where we are now. It's only been released a few months, but it does involve a lot of the heritage, constant listening to players. Some of the top players currently using these for recording and thinking of taking them out on tour are the guys from Sum 41, Matt Bellamy from Muse, who are quite well known, but even some of the more traditional guys. I know Gary Moore has got one at the moment in the studio which he's trying. He's always been a player that's been very open to new ideas, and although he keeps his traditional stuff in his armoury, he's always been one to experiment, and we're actually even thinking of sending one to Jeff Beck, so we still try and build things for all styles of players, and that's one of the reasons why we make so many amps. If you're just beginning, there's the MG series, which features some of the character of Marshall. If you're playing slightly more seriously but don't want to invest the full amount, there's any of the AVTs, 20, 50, 100, 150, 275, wherever you want to fit in. If you're looking at valve amps, there's the DSLs or the TSLs, there's combo versions as well. And then of course, if you're looking for the ultimate sort of metal amp, you've got the Mode 4. But it isn't just a metal amp. I think it looks, doesn't it look beautiful? Don't you think it looks fantastic? I'd rather take that home and make love to my wife. People might think I was a bit strange. So we spend a lot of time on the cosmetics as well. It's very important. The things that look cool and one of the reasons for Jim designing the stack in the first place was because at that time the bands were playing in some quite horrible places like ballrooms, where you've got plush velour curtains with a little golden ball hanging down with the lights on them. So it was thought that it would just make the backdrop. So by putting in 3 or 4 stacks, suddenly you've got an image and an appearance. It's true today. There's so many bands even now use the Wall of Marshall to make a lifestyle statement. That's the way it's become. Run like Harley Davidson, Levi jeans, all those kind of things become a lifestyle icon. And unfortunately, we've become that kind of stature. But it's not through accident, it's a lot of hard work by a lot of people. So on that note, I'd very much like to thank all the people from the store for inviting us here. Thank you very much. And to our host and driver, Pierre, thank you very much. We couldn't have done it without you. And after we leave here tonight, he's got to drive us all the way back to Copenhagen so we can catch a plane in the morning. So his job isn't finished yet. We're both going to go to sleep in the car, but hopefully he isn't. So I try never to sleep, at least not when I'm driving. So
Another. I think you want to hear another one from Chris, don't you?
Yes.
Do you want to hear another one from Chris?
Yeah!
CDs for sale, and please buy them because he needs the money. Chris George on guitar. Thank you.